then also, let me just pull up my notes. We're going to just jump right into our talk. So everybody, the agenda for today, we have our first talk with Maria Korneeva. So here in just a second, I'll introduce her. We'll have her give her presentation. I'm really excited for her topic. And then after that, we'll have our discussion panel. We have Tracy Lee from this Labs who's here for that. And then Madleina and Jessica from the Angular team are also here for that discussion. I'm really excited for that. And I will mention, there will be time at the end of that for some Q&A. So if you have questions that you'd like to ask, again, the focus of today's entire event is all about women in Angular, women in programming. So if you have any questions regarding women in Angular, please put those in the chat. These could be anything. It could be, advice for making career moves. It could be advice for starting your own company. Tracy is perfect person to ask for that. It could be even something like dealing with coworkers who are toxic, anything like that. Whatever questions you have, now's your chance to get some great advice. And we do have some questions that we've kind of set up before, like we have things that we want to ask as well, but like I said, there will be that time at the end where we'll set aside Q&A time and just let you ask what you're curious about. And then at the very end, we have Martina Kraus joining us, and she's going to give a talk about signals. So I'm excited for that as well. But Maria, let me have you come on stage, and then everybody else will just kind of turn our cameras off, and I'll let you know when we're going to turn our cameras on. But Maria, I have a question for you. We always like to do little icebreaker questions just to get into it, because I think it's more fun to get to know our speakers beyond who you are just as developers. There's so much more that makes you who you are. And so these are one of my favorite things to do as part of our events and even on our podcast. But I thought it'd be fun, Maria. I don't know if are you really into sports at all?
Well, not really. Well, sometimes I watch some sports, but not that often. And well, I am into sports. I do 20 burpees per day.
Oh, nice. There you go. That's more than I do. But so I have to kind of admit the same. Like, I grew up very athletic. I loved sports. I'd always watch basketball and just different sports, even football. But now I'm not so much. It doesn't interest me as much. But when the World Cup comes on, it is on as much as I possibly can watch it. I was a soccer player my whole life. And so I'm really excited right now because we've got the Women's World Cup going. So I thought it'd be fun if we asked you a question about that, but slightly a little bit different. So I'm going to actually ask two questions here. One being, have you followed it at all? Do you follow it? If so, what team are you cheering for?
Well, I should be, but I was not so far because I had a lot of work to do for the client. But yeah, I should be. I will be starting next week maybe.
Nice.
And if then maybe, then probably Germany, because that's the country where I'm based, and that's where my bubble is.
Nice.
And my bubble is discussing it a lot.
Yeah, it's in Germany is such, you guys are such good soccer players. So that's awesome. But so then my follow-up question to that is not technology related. If you were going to represent, I will say Germany, if you're going to represent Germany for, it could be a sport or it could just be any hobby or talent, just whatever, what would you want that activity to be? What would you want to have? Like, I am representing Germany for blah. What would that be?
Well, I don't know, really spontaneously, I think about chess, just because it blows my mind that chess is considered sports. And that makes me contemplate what sports is. Is it something for the body? Is it something for the mind? Is it something for both of it? And I find chess, I cannot play chess, but maybe I shouldn't represent Germany in this sense, but I would love to, I would love to be able to to play chess well, because it's a nice strategic game, which has a lot of real life appliances. So yeah.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It gets your mind thinking, that's for sure. I'm not good at it either. I cannot claim that. So, but that is awesome. So Maria, do you want to kind of introduce yourself a little bit, and then the time is yours. We'll turn it over to you.
Okay, then I will share my slides because part of the introduction is on the slide. And I'll start the presentation. So, yeah, thank you for having me here. And when I've heard that this meetup gonna feature women of Angular, I thought that I should talk about women as well. So it came to the topic, what do great women in IT and Angular have in common? But before we go to the topic, I'd like to briefly introduce myself. My name is Korneeva. I am a human being. I have a PhD in linguistics. I am a Google developer expert in Angular. Currently, I work as a freelancer, to be more precise, as a front-end technology lead, but I also conduct workshops, Angular workshops, web development workshops. And I'm currently working on my own course on accessibility. That's why I'm not following up on following soccer as of now. And to balance off this whole bragging and glorious bragging here, I also suffer from the imposter syndrome from time to time. So yeah, that's me. But today we're not talking about me. We are talking about great women in the history of IT. And it might be not a surprise. I'd like to start with Grace Hopper. And you might know that she created a compiler for a programming language. And she believed that actually programming can be simplified if we would use English language. So her compiler converted English terms into machine code. And if I think about it, the majority of the languages that I know, programming languages, they all are English-based and not German-based. Well, maybe for good, not French-based or any other language. So many of the modern computing languages are English-based. What is the bridge to Angular? Angular also has a compiler. This is ng-conf, which is a wrapper around the TypeScript compiler, which is TSC. By the way, my talk will be more introductory, but I'll try to enhance it with some advanced topics for advanced developers. But for like a tech dive, I think Martina will cover a very nice topic. So coming back to the compilers. Well, the compiler also bridges the developer experience and the runtime performance, because it allows us to write the code as we are convenient with. But under the hood, the compiler runs several optimizations for us, and we don't have to do that ourselves. And a fun fact here, if you are an advanced developer, you might have seen this sign which in the compiled code indicating some private entities, which this sign is called theta, just as a fun fact here. But coming back to Grace Hopper, another achievement of hers is that she created a 500-page comprehensive manual of operations for the automatic sequence control calculator. Well, sadly, she was not credited for this manual. But this brings me to Angular again. Well, Angular has extensive documentation as well. So if we go there, you will not only find some getting started tutorials, but also some best practices. I don't know how many of you have heard that there's, or have seen that there is some best practices on accessibility or some developer guides for testing. And the documentation itself is so comprehensive that there's even a guideline for contributors. So everyone can contribute to Angular documentation, be it correcting a typo or providing a translation in a different language or adding some topic or correcting some topics. So here you have a lot of guidelines and everyone is welcome. Coming back to the slides. And coming back to Grace Hopper, you might also know that she was credited for coining the term bug or debugging, because when her assistants found a moth stuck in the relay in some server, when they were removing this bug, Grace Hopper referred to this process as debugging the system, and so the term was coined. Coming to Angular and debugging, Angular also has some tools for debugging, in particular Angular DevTools. It is a browser extension which provides some help for debugging Angular-specific topics or issues. For this, you have to start your application with the optimization switched off, starting from the Angular 12. And if you go to the developer tools, I will make it a bit bigger so that you can see. If you go to the developer tools and install this extension, go to, oh, I don't see Angular. It's Safari, it's the wrong browser. Here we go. So if you go to the developer tools in Chrome or Firefox, you can go to the Safari, to the Angular tab, and then you will see some reference to the components which are used in your application. I've just started the default one, so I just have the uproot. And in here, you can see the properties of my component. You can see the profiler. So if I click on the recording button and start to interact with the web, just go to the provider, start to record. And if I interact with the application, you can see that the profile will be recorded, which will help me to analyze some runtime behavior of my application, for example, change detection cycles. Also, in the components, when I switch and I click on it, you can see that the reference to the component is saved in the variable $ng0, and I can conveniently refer to this on my console. Oops. And then you see this is my component, so I can also reference it and do some debugging here. And of course, it's also well documented. So if you go to DevTools, you will see some videos, you will see some screenshots, some useful information on how to use this debugging tools in Angular. So coming back to the presentation and to the next figure, Mary Kenneth Keller. She's the first person to earn a PhD in computer science in the United States. She also participated in the implementation of the BASIC kernel, and she helped establish the Association of Small Computer Users in Education. But for me, the most important thing is that she was one of the first persons to realize how important computers are for education. So the bridge to Angular is that Angular is also important for education. If you go to the website made with Angular, you will see that there are several educational websites, some museums, or like here, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, or the Udacity online course platform, or Udemy, or American Museum of Natural History, Wolfram Alpha, etc. So several websites from the educational area and from many other areas are Angular powered. Moreover, education is important for the Angular team as well. So here you have the collection of curated educational resources for Angular itself. Some books, workshops, courses, also community-based and promoted, some podcasts as well, some development tools enhancing Angular and making our developer experience better. So here on angular.io, you have a lot of resources for this. coming back to our great women, the next figure is, I guess, my favorite one is Margaret Hamilton. She invented the term software engineering as second half of the engineering process, or like inherent part of the system engineering process. It's not only the hardware, it's also the software that makes the system work. So that's her who introduced this way of thinking. But most importantly, she and her team were responsible for writing and testing all onboard in-flight software on the Apollo mission, in particular on the command and lunar module. Well, the connection to Angular. First of all, when you start a default application, the first thought you see is a little sign of this rocket. So all our Angular applications are little and big Apollo missions. But maybe you've noticed that I mentioned that Margaret was responsible not only for writing the code, but also for testing it. So Angular also gives us a lot of tooling for testing. First of all, the guidance. So here, again, in the documentation, we have a lot of best practices, some configuration options, etc. But Angular also gives us several testing modules so that our tests are easier to write and to understand. My favorite one is HTTP client testing module, because with this, you can not only mock your HTTP requests, but also your responses, not only the successful ones, but also the error responses, so that you can test your retries, your error handling, etc. So it's really, really useful. Coming back to Margaret Hamilton. Well, during the Apollo mission, approximately 3 minutes before the moon landing, the radar was still switched on and was draining a lot of computer power, a lot of power from the computer system, meaning that there was not enough power to calculate all the mission critical issues and tasks. And that's why there was a never supposed to happen error displayed on the display. It was a critical moment since the astronauts didn't know what to do and how to proceed with the calculations. However, Hamilton actually foresaw this and introduced kind of asynchronous calculation method, kill and recalculate, as she called it, so that she introduced the basic like the error handling for the whole system. The same with Angular. Angular has a default error handler, which catches all unforeseen errors and will output them on the console. So what you can do, you can implement it and implement the handle error, and then you can log your errors, you can track them, or you can redirect the user to the tech error page or whatever you want. But the most important thing is that Angular does provide this functionality for us, and it comes out of the box. This error handler is there to catch the errors, even if we don't implement anything. And the second thing is that, I don't know if you've noticed, Angular documentation also has the whole reference to the potential Angular issues well documented, provided with description and some instructions on how to debug this error. So whatever can happen, you can find some documentation on these issues in here as well. So we are prepared for our critical mission with Angular. The next great woman is Elizabeth Feindler. She was a director of the Network Information Systems Center at the Stanford Research Institute. And whenever you wanted a domain, you would literally go to this person and, request one. So it's like a living registrar, basically. And she is also credited for introduction of the domain name protocol. The metaphor in the Angular world, the equivalent in the Angular world would be AngularJSON. So if you go to AngularJSON in your project, you could configure whatever you want here. You can configure the prefix, you can configure the polyfills or your main entry file, or index, HTML, and TypeScript configuration, and some asset style scripts. You can even configure here some budgets for your application. But the thing is that the most important things are not displayed in here because they happen under the hood. If we go to the documentation of this workspace configuration, you can see that there's a lot of optimization happening. Scripts are being minified, tree-shaked, the dead code will be eliminated, CSS will be, critical CSS will be inlined. Same for, well, some optimization will also happen to styles and fonts. But as you can see, and I will make it a bit bigger, you can see that all the default values are set to true. So all the optimization is already happening out of the box. So for me, this is this optimization is one of the unsung, like Angular is the unsung hero in the sense of in terms of optimization, which happens under the hood. The next one is Anya Easley. It's one of the first African Americans to work at NASA, and she began her work as a human computer. She represents a lot of women who were hired to perform some analyzing and doing some calculations by hand, because that's what was happening a lot in the mid of the 20th century, and there were a lot of women that contributed to the advancement of the technology. All the unsung heroes, all the heroes that were not credited or often not invited to some celebrations afterwards, but contributed a norm to the calculations, to the whole engineering. For example, Annie was running some simulations for the newly planned Plumbrook reactor facility, so doing some real complex calculations by hand. In the Angular world, the unsung heroes, or the underdogs, to my mind, are the decorators. Just as a reminder, a decorator is a function which takes an object and can add some functionality to it. In my case here, I have a function Angular magic with the target, and then I just add some property to it, and which is awesome, and set it to true. In the syntax of ECMAScript 5, I would just call this function and give the my app class as a parameter. In the ECMAScript 2018 syntax, I could use the @ sign and put this decorator in just before my class. And I could also use the parameters with it. So whenever I apply my decorator, whenever I decorate my class, I have this property is awesome, which is set to true. Which brings me to the, which brings me to the decorators in Angular. And I'm sure there are some properties that you don't use on a daily basis. So we have the options to configure change detection, view providers, even provide some module ID, to configure the template and style URLs, the animations. You could even configure which delimiters you could use for your interpolation. So it's really powerful, and you can use decorators with components, services, pipes, etc. You would use them usually as the following. Here we go, one of the examples. So everyone uses them. They are really helpful for the, they are the basis of the inherent part of the compiler process. They help to enhance the TypeScript code with the Angular capabilities during the compiling process. They do provide configurations or configuration options, etc. So everyone uses them, but to my mind, they are not, well, we're not really aware of them. They are the so-called unsung heroes. But yeah, well, coming back to Annie, she also advocated for and encouraged female minority students to study and work in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. And fun fact, she was also the first to wear pants to work in the 70s, but of course, after talking to her supervisor. Yeah, let's come to the conclusions. Well, I think we are often stuck in our daily routine, like fixing some bugs or developing some complex features. But it's sometimes helpful and necessary to take a step back and to admire the beauty of the whole, to admire the beauty of a framework that we're using or the technologies, to celebrate people who are behind those technologies and who contributed to the IT world in which we're living now. So if you, after this talk, if you think, wow, Angular is great, or well, I hope you would also think something like, oh, I definitely need to look into the docs more often. I do. Maybe you would also think, wow, these women are great. But I would also like you to think or to take a moment to celebrate yourself and to have a look at your small and big achievements and to admire the beauty of the whole. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maria. That was inspirational for one, but like I always love your presentations. I just think you're so well organized, but like, I don't know, just everything. The information you share is always so spot on, but like I said, just very inspirational. So thank you for sharing their stories and love it. So it's kind of exciting to think about, 50 years from now, 25 years from now, who from programming will have their name like in the history books like that. And honestly, I think so many people, like all of us who are here today, I think all of you are so qualified for that. So I'm excited to see where history goes in the next 25, 50 years. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know if
All
there's
right.
some questions.
If we have some, let's hold the questions until the end. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and then we can have you and Martina kind of answer some Q&A stuff at the end. But perfect. So, all right, Minnie, are you able to join? Are you able to speak? Like, is your mic working?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so everybody, we're gonna move into our next part of the event. And this is a panel discussion. So we'll have Tracy and Jessica and Madleina, you can come on as well. And as I said before, like this is the time really where I'm inviting anybody from the community. If you're here and you have questions about really anything related to women or underrepresented groups in Angular, in programming, please put your questions in the Q&A. And then as we get through our questions that we have for our three panelists, then we'll save some time and let you ask your questions as well, and we'll have them answer those. So again, Q&A, don't use the chat. I think Q&A will be better for that. But I think what I'd like to do, first of all, for our three panelists is one thing, like Jessica, you and I were talking a little bit before we really started the event, but you were mentioning your little R2 droid. And I know that's a side project. It's something you do for fun, but it's something that I think makes you amazing on top of what you're already doing. Just things that you're doing that show that, women are capable and wonderful and amazing. And what I'd love to have is for our three panelists, if you could each just go around, introduce yourselves, maybe share a little bit about your current role, and then share something that you're currently working on, something that is exciting to you. And it doesn't have to be related to programming specifically. It could be anything, just whatever is a passion project that you have going that you'd like to share with the community. But I don't know, Jessica, can I put you on the spot and have you go first?
You certainly can. Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Janiuk. I am a senior engineer on the Angular framework team. And you've probably seen me on YouTube and at events and whatnot. So yeah, I guess the thing that like people know about me right now is that I am building an R2, but and R2 is mostly done. But I think the thing that I'm most passionate about right now is getting settled into my house and doing all of the like house projects that come with a new house. And I think actually having that R2D2 project has really enabled me to be able to just tackle any project that's in the house, like from wiring to like whatever needs fixing. And I attribute that to just like me getting to learn from a project I did for fun. And I think that's really enabling for me. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. It's so nice to have you here. I know you've been busy with the move and everything, so we appreciate your time. But then
Thanks.
Madleina or Tracy, do either one of you want to go next?
I can go next. I'm Madleina Scheidegger. I was the engineering manager for Angular until very recently. But I decided for my own career, I wanted to go back to be an individual contributor. And so very recently made a change, although I still consider myself part of the Angular community. I think once you're in here, you're stuck for life in many ways. So still excited to connect with you guys, even if I'm currently more working outside of Angular and more of an infrastructure project. I think I don't know if I have like a lot of projects in the sense of building something, but what I find is, and this goes into one of your panel discussion questions too, which is I like doing non-tech things in my free time as sort of a balance to my work. And so I'll often end up doing more fun things with my friends, puzzles, relaxing things, all of that kind of a thing. So that's more what I end up doing in my free time. I think what I've been most involved with the last few years is I've picked up dressage, and it's a horseback riding discipline, and so it's been really fun to really improve my skills, and I get to hang out in the sun with a horse, so that's always a bonus there as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And thank you as well. Thank you for joining. And then Tracy.
My name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm still on Twitter at Lady Leet. Also on Blue Sky, but I don't check it. So, you can, what do they call Blue Sky? Not tweeting.
I know, posting. I don't know.
Message me. Well, it's better to find me on Twitter anyways. CEO of a company called This.Labs, and we do a lot of Angular, React, Vue, Svelte, etc. consulting, but fell in love with Angular many years ago and absolutely still love Angular. And it's really cool to see like large companies still adopting Angular and moving to Angular and things like that. So one of the things I'm really passionate about is empowering women in tech. So we actually started moving. I've been doing this engineering leadership series on the This.blog. So if you go to the This.blog, you'll see an engineering leadership series. So talking to engineering leadership, kind of director level and above, and getting their perspective on how to run engineering teams. And it's been really amazing. I feel like every single topic and person I've interviewed has had really interesting insight. And I think as we all grow up in the Angular community and are growing in our careers, that type of stuff, learning leadership is really important for our careers to grow generally, right? Or at least understand what's happening, even if you are an engineer. So that's my little project these days, but I am always looking for recommendations on people. So if you have any people, you can always slide into my DMs and let me know.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. And what I love too about the panel here is how much diversity we have, like just the different roles that each of you hold. And I think it's going to have, we're going to have a great discussion. I do want to give Minnie an opportunity to introduce herself a little bit more as well. Minnie is one of my co-organizers here at the meetup. So Minnie, tell us a little bit about your background and maybe something that you're working on as well.
Sure. Hey everyone, so my name is Minnie, and like Tracy, I love Angular. I've been working on Angular for a very long time, and I'm a UI engineer, and just I'm trying to explore more things in Angular. Excited about signals and every new thing which is coming up.
Nice. Well, I'm excited to have you here. It's so hard to get Minnie with us sometimes because our events are normally in the evenings, and it's just such a, time difference between here and India. So I'm really excited that she's here with us today. But I just wanted to get launched here as we go into this discussion. I thought it'd be a really good question to ask about barriers. And, again, that could be into programming itself, or as you've stepped into these different roles, different positions, maybe talk about like some barriers or one that really stands out in particular that you feel like was a setback or just a really steep hill to overcome as you were getting into programming, as you were getting into the tech industry. And then share with us how you got through that. What did you do that you feel like made all the difference in the world for pushing through those challenges?
I can go first. I would say, a lot of times we think that there's something stopping us, right? Like, well, I can't do X because of X. And I would challenge that mindset, because a lot of times it's just this sort of personal barriers, or, it's all in your head, right? Like, for example, I was having a conversation with a CTO yesterday, and, there's a lot of questions about, well, if I'm an SVP of engineering, how do I become a CTO, right? And there's all these self-limiting beliefs on, well, how do I get into the conversations? Well, how do I talk, to the CFO about budget and things like that, right? But, you're already there. Like, there's not a door that's closed for you, right? And I think no matter what level you're at, I think it's very inspiring to hear that even people at the SVP level feel this way, right? But, at any level, the things that you might think are holding you back, the things that you might think are not available to you for whatever reason, maybe you should think those doors are actually open and try, because that could be the only thing setting you back.
So along with that then would be, sometimes I think maybe the fear comes from, if I ask that question, if I vocalize my opinion, are they going to find that annoying? Am I out of place? Is that not my position to say anything? So how can we break those limiting thoughts down, or just maybe not worry about it, or go about it in a tactful
Being naive
way?
is the best way to go, right? Like, because I think also, if you're not in a culture that allows you to be yourself, that allows you to ask what you think are dumb questions, right? Like, then are you in the right place? And a lot of times, we've had, women, a lot of times women will doubt themselves in these areas, but then they start asking the questions because they're encouraged to do so. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, thank you for asking these questions. And so a lot of times it's actually incredibly helpful, and it's what's missing in the room. So anytime you think, oh, should I speak up or not? I'm embarrassed at XYZ. You're probably the voice that everybody wants to hear. And if you're not, then, there's other problems.
I love that though. How about any of you others? Any barriers or challenges you've overcome?
I can go next. I would say for me, I've been my biggest barrier. And from that perspective, I mean, like, I've always assumed, because I do not have the formal computer science degree background, that everyone else has the more knowledgeable opinion, or the larger amount of experience, which isn't necessarily the case, or that somehow my perspective is less valuable, which just isn't true. And I think the cases where I guess I started to realize that wasn't a valid opinion to have in my own brain is when I started hearing people say stuff like, oh, well, if Jessica couldn't go work at Google, then none of the rest of us could. This is at a company that I worked at well before I ever thought I would be at Google. People were saying that about me then because they perceived me to be like very capable and smart, but I did not think of myself that way. And it was because I continually thought of myself as someone who was just less knowledgeable. So regularly challenging my own thoughts about the fact that I do have plenty of knowledge, experience, and good ideas, good questions, regularly challenging my own confidence levels. Those are all and just challenging the imposter syndrome in my head is something that I constantly have to do. So that's something that I think I encourage everyone to do, because you are capable and you do know a lot more than you think you do.
I had someone give me some advice once about one way to help beat back that imposter syndrome is to keep a journal, keep a log of all the things that you've done over the last week or so, and then look back on it often and look at all the things that you've been learning or the things you've accomplished. But do you have anything that you feel like you've done in particular that has really helped you to push that imposter syndrome back?
That's a really good question. I think reflection is really important. Like you're talking about, not even if you're not keeping a journal, remembering the accomplishment, like what was in the last release that you did, and the release before that, and the release before that, and I think one thing that always reminds me too is anytime I go on a stream or someone starts asking me questions about an area, and I start talking with nuance about it, just hearing myself in that moment reminds me of how much I already know about what I do and where my actual experience level is. So just making sure that we're actually listening to the right parts of what we're saying. Awareness, I guess, is the right way of phrasing that.
Yeah, I love that.
I think
Madleina?
on a similar theme, I was thinking about, I feel like a lot of times I don't know how to phrase it, but I almost didn't realize I should be intimidated, and so I just went off and did the thing. And so in some ways that there is that internal blocker, and sometimes being clueless enough to realize, well, should I take this on, or am I not even thinking about being brave as much as like, oh, let me go try that, and then suddenly realizing, oh, I could go off and do that, is a large part of how my career developed or how I got into computers. It was sort of the almost not thinking through, can I do it or not, and just going off and doing it. That doesn't mean I don't have imposter syndrome. I think I have it the same as everyone else. But there's definitely been moments that have been turning points in my career where it almost feels accidental that I went into it and I was like, oh, well, might as well try it and see what happens. So in that way, again, I think what, echoing a little bit what both Jessica and Tracy said, is like, try it, give it a shot. I think is a large part of that often is just the most important step, but also have your own network there. And I think that's maybe the thing I'll add on is I have a good set of friends that I'll talk to, and we support each other and we are each other's cheerleader, because sometimes it's hard to be your own cheerleader, but you can have a friend who can be the cheerleader for you. It's like, of course you can do it, in a way that you will never claim for yourself. And so if you don't have that network yet, build that up. Find your cheerleaders in your life that will be the, of course you can do it voice. If that's harder to hear from yourself, you might actually hear it from your friend instead.
I would totally echo that. I think sometimes just hearing, or like working with a coach, for example, right? Like just hearing your thoughts, just hearing yourself talk sometimes helps you work through your own thoughts and your own blockers and barriers. I think a lot of times we think we know what the problem is. And until we talk through it with somebody, we realize that the problem that you thought was a problem wasn't actually a problem. This is actually the problem, or this is what I actually want when I was chasing this all along. Those types of conversations really help. And sometimes, again, it's just, having somebody there to listen to you talk, because it forces you to listen to yourself talk. But yeah, Madleina, same thing, right? Like just being naive about things, like, it's like the whole, like, you don't know what you don't know. I think as we develop as developers, you know more what you don't know. So then you get a little bit more worried because you know you don't know something, versus when you're just starting off and you don't know what you don't know, it doesn't matter. And so you have this sort of like confidence, or being naive, either way, right, to actually succeed better, because there's no self-limiting beliefs there yet, which is nice.
Don't give your mind that time and that space to actually develop those self-doubts. Just jump into it. I love that.
Yeah. Sometimes we overthink a lot, and that really takes most of the effort. So it's best to just cut it short and just go about it.
It's also helpful to remind yourself that no one knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you're Minko Getchev, I guess. But no one knows everything, and it's okay to not know something in the space that you work in. That's normal. That's very normal. Also, I want to use this opportunity to just make mention to Madleina. We miss you on the team.
I miss you guys too. The other thing I was going to mention with that is fake it till you make it is actually a strategy. And it's one that I think people undercount to some degree, and many people do it, right? And so you might not realize that everybody around you is also faking it till they're making it. But part of that is also you can't learn without being uncomfortable. If you know everything you're doing, you're not actually, it's hard to really learn a new skill. So part of learning is being uncomfortable, and part of learning is pushing that. And that's part of that faking it till you're making it is part of that uncomfortableness, right? And so learning how to cope with that for yourself will then allow you to tackle new things where you're going to be pushed a little further in order to learn and then take the next step and the next step, right? And so it's good to, yeah, just go out and try it and see what happens.
I mean, I guess I'll bring up another woman that we love in Angular, Sarah Drasner. Like, I was talking to her about how she got into open source once, and she said, well, I just started like making a bunch of GitHub repos and they all kind of sucked. And I mean, it's her opinion of herself, right? They're all whatever. And then I just kept doing it. And then I got confidence, and somebody said, somebody accepted one of my contributions, and then it was great. And then I just started making all these code pens, and then, and then now she is who we know and love today, right? But it was a lot of just trial and error. It was a lot of just throwing stuff at the wall and, not caring about what other people thought, trying to be helpful, trying to create useful things. And, now she's Sarah Drasner, and she was before, right? So like everywhere along that journey, just having the confidence to just do what you want and not think about it much, I think is incredibly valuable.
It's a great example.
I'll take the next question. 43% of women leaders are leaving their jobs because of burning out. How can we address this issue?
I think her mic kind of cut out there, but of burning out. It's a question about how do we not burn out as women in tech? How do we prevent that or work around it?
That's always such a tough question. I think one we all face. I would break it down into what are the things we can control and the ones we can't. There's a certain amount of burnout that comes from the job you're in or the environment you're in that you're going to have a harder time controlling. And I'm very conscious of the fact that the easy advice is to give, well, then just leave. But that's a very privileged way of phrasing it too, because there might be reasons that you can't leave. There isn't anything else available. It is still important to have an income for most of us, right? Like we're not in these positions. So sometimes leaving isn't the answer, right? And you can't, but recognizing the fact that that is contributing to it, and you might have limited control over some of these factors that lead to burnout. So knowing that, I think the two things that I'm most focused is understanding when am I on the verge of burning out? So I'm at least recognizing where, if I'm getting closer to that, to know what are my warning signs and what are ways that are leading towards that. And then the other one is finding balance is very important for that, because a lot of that is for me is finding my downtime and what is important for me to recharge. How do I recharge in my downtime? And what do I need for the moment that helps me get that balance and not just keep going and keep going and keep going. So I'll start with that and see if Tracy and Jessica have anything to add.
I definitely do. And Madleina, you're gonna laugh at this because the advice I'm going to give is advice that I need to regularly learn, which is it's okay to say no when something is asked of you. Like I am very much guilty of, oh yeah, I can do that. Yeah. Oh, you need me to you need me to, I don't know, write a newsletter? Sure. I'll do that. And then eventually I have so many things on my plate that I am feeling super overwhelmed and starting to feel that sense of burnout. So this is an ongoing problem for me and something that I definitely need to learn how to best deal with, when to say no. So I guess I'll start there with my commentary.
I would say like the, a lot of people take, let's say, New Year's as a way to set resolutions, figure out what you want for the rest of the year, set yourself on a good path for what you're going to accomplish this year. But what I find is, you really need to kind of reevaluate things on an ongoing basis, whether that's every quarter, probably every quarter, or every 6 to 8 weeks or so, just kind of depending on where your life is. I think, what you set out in the beginning in a year ago may not be what you necessarily want. And I think that's where you get really burnt out. Like if you are focused on something and let's say you're trying to climb the corporate ladder, right? You're at an organization and you're trying to do this thing and you're getting pushback, or it's hard, or it becomes unenjoyable, or you stop liking yourself, you stop liking the people around you, right? Like, don't forget to stop and ask yourself what your values are and why you're doing what you're doing. I think there's never really any point on having a job or doing whatever you're doing, whether it's you being in a relationship and you're burnt out, whether it's you in your career, you're burnt out, to do something to where you've lost the passion or the reason for it, right? Like you can always change your path. So I don't think we do that enough, right? Like stopping back and reflecting and saying, do I still want to do this? Is this still the right path for me? Or should I be changing my mind and focusing on something else? I think that really helps avoid burnout, because I think burnout a lot of times happens because you stop being excited about what you're doing, or you lose the reason why you're doing it. The reason why you started doing something is not there anymore.
I really relate to that one, because I think there's a tendency in software development where so much of the focus gets put on the technical skills. And that's kind of a never ending ladder, right? Like there's always a new library to learn, a new technology, something, a new version of Angular is released and you have to go learn standalone components now, whatever it is. So it's ongoing, and it gets really easy to feel lesser than or not good enough. And so one thing I've been able to do, which I've really loved, is having these kinds of conversations, getting into other skills and other interests. And I think that taps into what you're saying, Tracy, where you're focusing on what is it that I'm so passionate about? Why did I get into this? But by engaging in those other kinds of conversations and focusing on, I think they're called soft skills, but I don't really think that's the best term for them. I think they're just as critical to your career and to your happiness as those technical skills. But focusing on those as well has really helped me, because it makes it easier to, like with Maria's talk, and she's sitting there and she's sharing these inspirational stories about these women forerunners who've given their, these great examples. And I think when you engage in these kinds of conversations, it's really easy to find those examples and go, oh my gosh, like she is so amazing. I want to be like her. That's exactly why I got into this. So for me, it's a lot of these exact kinds of conversations and just engaging in the quote unquote soft skills as well.
I'd like to add to what Madleina was saying about balance, and that to be aware of what you're filling your free time with, because if you feel like, well, I'm not a good enough engineer because I'm not coding in my free time, know that like it takes a very, very special person to want to code all of their time and have that be their hobby and their job. I think for a lot of people, if we were to do that, that would just contribute more and more to burnout because you're never actually leaving the mental space of work. So making sure that you're spending your free time doing something that reinvigorates you, lets you relax, lets you energize, and makes you feel rested. I'm also guilty of like doing something in my free time that can be somewhat stressful. And I've come back from like 2-week vacations going, I need another vacation because I didn't use my vacation wisely. So make sure that you are aware of what you actually need to restore yourself so that you can continue to do your best.
I love that.
I might also be a little bit contrarian to some of what's been said, but I think that passion is good, but it's not the, there's more to take into account than that. And there's two different ways to look at it. One is, part of that is often the thought is like, oh, to get a job, I need to have done all of these things in my free time as well in order to prove I'm passionate about tech outside of work. And as Jessica said, that's not everyone. I've never been that person. I've never been able to have tech be my free time as well because I just needed the break from that. That doesn't make me less of an engineer than someone who does, nor does it make me better than them. We're just different. But a lot of times that gets conflated. So I just want to make sure people don't feel like, oh, I'm a bad person for not doing it. No, you are who you are. Find your own path. But the other one is that passion work can be important, but I would actually just put the thought out there. There's a bit of a privilege in being able to be passionate about work. And not everybody might be in that position. And so you also need to find the tools if you're in a position where you don't have that privilege to be passionate about your work for the moment. You might eventually be able to pivot, but it might not be right now. And so make sure you look after yourself even in those moments if you're finding yourself in those scenarios. And passion cannot compensate for a really, truly shitty work environment.
So true. I'm
Yes.
glad you brought that up. Was somebody going to say something there? Or?
Oh, I was just agreeing with
Oh, okay.
Madleina.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I want to get into at least one or two of our Q&A questions, and I think it does go a little bit along with what Madleina was saying there. This first one, which is they're just hoping that you all can share some initiatives or strategies or just some insight into how your companies or your teams have effectively promoted gender inclusivity at your company. Do you have any ideas on how that can be done effectively?
I can start from my view as a manager too. There's been a lot that's done at very large levels, but I find the most effective to be at almost small levels, even if you can't reach as many folks with that. But being able to use my position of managing a team, leading a team on what have been the most effective for me in doing it is actually making sure we challenge our own unconscious biases. And one of the most effective ones I've used over the years is making sure that when I think of a project and the first name pops in, I don't stop there. I actually go through most of the people on the team to go through, is there someone else who could use that opportunity more that doesn't come to mind first? And that sounds like maybe a small thing, but the opportunities are often what then unlocks a whole lot of other things. And so it's so important, these small moments as well on everyday, for everyone that's involved in these, like who are you asking? Who are you giving opportunities for can make such a huge difference. So that's been one of my most powerful tools and one I'll continue to employ as well.
I think just like, reading the room too, right? Like, there's so many different personalities and there's so many different, being a woman in a room or even being guy in a room, either way, right? Like you might feel that, let's say, someone who is historically underrepresented feels a certain way. And you might be right, you might be wrong, right? But just having that, just asking, like afterwards, hey, did you feel a certain way about this? I remember, there was a situation in which I felt like some of the, woman developers on my team they weren't speaking up much. So I wanted to make sure that they felt okay in these situations. And they said they actually really enjoyed them and they just wanted to sit back and they actually really enjoyed just hanging out. And I said, okay, well, that's great. That's awesome, right? But what I started feeling in that situation was, oh my gosh, is this not an inclusive enough place for them? Like, what's going on? They're not talking, et cetera, et cetera. But, after I clarified with them, then, I realized that that's just what they wanted to do. So I think, we put a lot of assumptions or make a lot of assumptions about other people based on what we might want or what makes us potentially feel comfortable or uncomfortable. But that may not always be true. So before taking action to change something, it's definitely best to check in.
I think I love that, by the way, the kind of shedding assumptions and asking. I think that's been fantastic. I think my strategy hasn't necessarily isn't like the most accessible or ideal in that I think it's largely been being visible and knowing that being on this team and having the opportunity to be like on a YouTube video or on a live stream or whatever, I take that opportunity because I know that other people are going to see it and they're going to see me and that has a lasting impact on people. I know it had a lasting impact on me before I joined Google, before I joined the Angular team, when I saw previous women on the team give talks. So I think about how influential that was for me, and I want to make sure other people have that same influence when they see me. But I also recognize that in the position that I'm in, it's more visible than other people. So I guess what I can say is like, trying to be the person and speak up, knowing full well that other people will see you. It's a little scary, but it goes a long way for other people on your team and in your companies.
I think role models is something that's easy to discount, but we're all probably role models to someone, even if we don't realize it. And so there's a lot just by being there and being yourself and showing also different ways of doing things. We often have a visual of how a job gets done, of how a person is. What does it mean to be a speaker? What does it mean to be a lead? What does it mean to be a developer? And the more we can show that there's many different ways to do it, the easier it will be for the next person to do that too, of being different. And that can even be, as Tracy was pointing out, that everybody wants to speak up. Great, okay, how do you, having a lead that isn't the most vocal person in the meeting is a great way of showing someone who isn't the most vocal person in a team that they can be a lead without having to be the most vocal person on the team, right? And so there's all of these small things of being that model and showing different ways of doing it that will really help as well for others to follow your footsteps.
I think also we see, what do we see? What do we look up to? Like, let's say in the Angular community, right? Like we look up to what's on Twitter, right? Or what's at conferences. And so, there is this sort of idea that, okay, well, to be successful in Angular, let's say, or to up in my career, I need to speak on stages. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to whatever. And, if it doesn't excite you, you don't have to do that, right? I mean, there's so many like quiet open source contributors that have done amazing things for Angular, that have done amazing things for their career. Jali, I don't know if you all know him, but he was maintainer of Node.js, and he's like very well integrated into the Angular team, even though he's like an external contributor. And I mean, you don't really see him a lot at conferences, right? But I mean, he does a lot for the Angular community, so you don't have to follow those paths, right? I don't know. I mean, maybe Simona will disagree with me, but my perspective of Simona, who's, I think, is she engineering manager right now? Yeah, okay, so she's engineering manager. And, in the beginning, her and I met, and then, she gave her first talk, and then, she started working at Microsoft and all these other things. But I don't think everybody knows who Simona is. A lot of us do, but she's not like, always out there. She's doing her job, right? And she's good at it. And she's providing a lot of value, and she's succeeding in her career. And she doesn't need to go to 10 million conferences and have everybody know her to be successful. So just because you see patterns within communities or within what you perceive to be successful doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow those paths. I was going to a conference, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, do I have to dress up and wear heels and put on suits? And I was grossed out by it. But, I decided not to do that because I'm not excited about it and it exhausts me, right? I'd rather be myself. So don't always think the things that you see are necessarily the paths that you have to follow.
Awesome. Well, all three of you, thank you so much. And Minnie, thank you for joining as well. And I feel very inspired. I feel like we had some really good answers and just direction and guidance. So thank you so much for all of you for coming and contributing and sharing your thoughts. If you're interested at all in connecting with any one of these three amazing contributors and members of our community, I'm sure you can find them on Twitter. If they want, they can put their Twitter handles in the chat. But we do need to move on. We have one more final presentation for today, and I'm really excited for this one, just like I have been with the other two. We've had such a great lineup of speakers. So I'm excited to have Martina Kraus come on. We'll have her turn her camera on. Oh, there she is. Awesome. How are you, Martina?
I'm great, thank you. It's been such a great event so far, and it's so many great advices from so many great people. I love it.
Right, I know. I think these are great events. One thing I don't know that you heard, and I'll announce it again, is that we're going to be doing. We're calling them the Hour of Empowering, which will just be an hour once every 3-ish months, where Angular developers can come and just ask these kinds of questions, and we'll have these kinds of discussions and really put a focus on women and underrepresented individuals in the community and giving everyone a chance to come and get this kind of advice. So I'm really excited for those. But Martina, I was saying before we had Maria come on that one of my favorite parts about our events is getting to know our speakers a little bit more and asking some questions about who you are. So one thing that I thought would be fun to ask you, and traditionally Women's History Month is in March, but we don't need to follow that. I think every month can be a month to celebrate women, but kind of along the lines of what Maria was doing with sharing some of her favorite women historical figures. Do you think there's a woman that you feel like maybe hasn't been highlighted or celebrated enough, or just someone that that you feel like if you could share someone's story, who would you share? Whose story do you feel like needs to be told?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's already a name that came up into my mind, and I thought about it until the moment Tracy mentioned Simona, because Simona really should get some recognition because she's an amazing person. But the person I had in mind was, and maybe the Angular community know her as well, it's Ana Citre, actually. She is the leader of the Angular Spain community, and she's been my manager in Auth0 for like a long time. And she's doing such a great work in getting women into IT. She's been a Woman TechMaker ambassador. She actually showed me how it is to have a good manager. I don't know, I'm from Germany. Maybe this is something cultural based, but I don't know, like whenever I had a problem, I just reached out to her and she solved it for me. Like working with her was one of the best experience ever I had in my whole life, having her as a manager. And she founded so many organizations, Women in Tech, crews and organization, and also helping developing the Angular Girls team to get more recognition and to create more awareness. She's been so amazing. So if you don't know her, Google her, follow her on Twitter, whatnot. She really, really should get all this recognition, and tell her she's doing an amazing job. She's just really, really awesome.
Could not agree more. She's totally fantastic. So thank you. I think that's a great suggestion. But all right, so let's get into this talk. I've been really eager. I know signals is really a hot topic right now, very important. So do you want to just introduce yourself and then let's just get right into it?
Yeah, I mean, I will, I share my screen and I will introduce myself throughout the slides later on. So first I will tell a short story and then, so yeah, welcome. I'm really, really eager to tell you more about Angular signals and of course the whole interoperability with RxJS, because I've been asked a lot of questions like, hey, yeah, signals, the new reactivity concept of Angular, but will observables now be replaced? And maybe what are about all the modules like the router module or the HTTP client, they're returning and giving us observables, will they also be replaced? And I want to answer these questions in my talk today. I just have 20 to 25-ish minutes. I hope I'm still able to answer all your questions. So yeah, signals are the kind of new reactivity concept in Angular. It helps us to get a finer control of change detection as well, to help Angular to really tell, hey, what actually changed? Because maybe you know right now, change detection is based on Zone.js. So it's more or less like a while guessing what changed and what not. And now with signals, we might get a clearer control of, hey, just this property changed. So we don't have to render the whole component tree again. We just might need to re-render this whole thing that actually changed. But when we're talking about reactivity, what is reactivity actually? And maybe feel free to type in the chat or ping me later about your thought. What is for you reactivity? What does it mean for you? When I think about reactivity, I think about having, for example, two fields. We assign those fields with values. Then we maybe add the one value to another one and assign the sum out of this to another field. And then, yes, let's log this result to a console. And hopefully, like as far as I remember, 11 plus 21 is 32. But what if we change one value in one field afterwards? And then we want to log the result again on the console. Will it be no different from 32 or will it still be 32? This is an issue because the best thing that would be that the result will immediately change as soon as we change a value that computes this result, right? And this is reactivity, that when we have something that's bound to another value, that it will be still changed. Usually we solve this with observables or subjects, but with signals, we get the same result, but in an even better structured way. I will show you how, but first I will explain myself a little bit further. I'm Martina, I'm based in Germany. So the second person actually from Germany, as Maria maybe also mentioned that she's from Germany as well. I'm a consultant, trainer, speaker all around Angular. I've been working with Angular since AngularJS basically, and I'm focused also a little bit into web security, but my main, let's say, focus points in Angular are the Angular compiler, like the new Ivy compiler, everything about compilation and rendering on that side. So hence also the standalone API, and of course reactivity, back then with RxJS and now with Signals. Because I love speaking a lot, going on conferences and loving to hear myself talking a lot, I've been recognized as a Google developer expert in Angular. So I'm traveling around the world. I'm really nervous. I know I've been so many great persons like before me, and the talk was so great for Maria. So I'm really nervous actually. So I'm sorry. I hope that I calm down a bit during my talk. So yeah, I travel around the world and giving talks all about Angular. I'm also being really involved into the women in IT tech scene, and also being recognized as a woman tech maker ambassador, helping women being empowered inside the IT. You can find me anywhere on Mastodon or Twitter or X or whatever is it called right now, with my Twitter handle, or just ping me an email if you have any further question. But enough from me. Let's look at this example again. How can we have this example in a more reactive way? And for that, we introduce signals in this code snippet. So first, we would create a signal with the value 11 and a signal with the value 21. Basically, what we're doing is capturing this value inside a little box. And I remember that Simona basically always calls this box a little creepy box, because we do not really know what is inside this box. At any moment, we could look inside the box and get out the value, but we don't know we just know it as soon as we open it. And this is basically a signal. And then we create a signal that is a so-called computed signal. And as we see, it's not just X plus Y. We're having a computed read-only signal that is bounded to the signal X and the signal Y. And maybe you also recognize this parenthesis after X and Y. Actually, we call here the getter function of the signal. So this is the moment where we open the box and take a look inside the value and getting it out of it. This is right now for X 11, and for Y, the value would be 21. And whenever X or Y changes, the computed signal will be recalculated again and will be assigned to Z, and Z will be then maybe a new value, whatever value changed of X or Y. How we set a value? Well, with a set function. So we can call the set function on a signal to assign a new value, in this case, the number 8, to the Y, and then set, since it is a computed signal, will be recalculated again, and we get 40. So basically, signals provide more reactivity. It doesn't, as observables, signals don't emit every single new value again and again. They just hold a new value the whole time. And as soon as someone calls the getter function, the value will be taken out. With that, we get a finer control over the whole change detection, because the signals, it notifies all the listeners to it as soon as the value changes. And the bad thing, it's side effect free. So there will be no other value changed other than the signal. So a signal is not just the value, it's a value plus the change notification of all the listeners who are calling the getter function. Maybe inside an Angular template of the component, maybe inside a service. It could be everywhere inside our Angular application. So enough from the slides. Let's show me some code. I always love some live coding. So here we have just an Angular application. Really important is that if you want to try out the signals afterwards, you need to have at least version 16, since Angular signals are developer preview just in version 16. So make sure to at least install this version. So here I haven't done really anything than just binding the string to a template. And here I'd like to introduce our first signal. Let's have it just a really, really simple one. Let's have a number signal. And the thing about assigning signals is that we need to give in a default value. That reminds us a little bit for behavior subjects, but it's still different. So let's give in an initial value. And then we can just bind it to the template by calling our getter function. Okay, so far so good. Let's see what happens. Yes, the 0 is bounded to the template. Okay, nothing really fancy till now. We can do this as well with a whole object, like signals can not just have a type of primitives, but of course also of an object. Like here I have maybe a person object and assigning initial value with my name and my age. And of course, if I want to bind this to a template, I could do it by calling the getter again and then the property name. Also, okay, not that really fancy till now. What happens if we change the value of count after a couple of seconds? For that, let me introduce a really simple example with a set timeout function. And let's say after 2 seconds, I want to set the count value to 11. 11 is my favorite number. So, okay. So after 2 seconds, the count value will be set to 11. Okay. The template re-renders again. Till now, the signal behaves like all the other values. So the change detection mechanism might be changed later on, but signals are completely integrated in the current change detection system of Angular. Okay, so far so good. Let's update the value. So instead of setting a whole new value, we can update the value by basically calling another function of the signal. For that, I will create an update count button and implement an update count function. And inside this function, I call the update function of my count signal. And with this function, I get the current value inside this box, so inside the signal. And what I could do is just multiplying it by 2. Okay, so whenever I click on the button, the count signal will be changed and my template will be notified and it will be multiplied by 2. When we have objects, we might not want to return a whole new object. We maybe just want to mutate the current object inside the signal. For that, Angular signals also have a special function on these kind of signals. So let's create another function. And inside this function, we also, again, changing or mutating our person signal by setting maybe the age, maybe +1. And again, in this example, let me show you like that. In this example, we're not returning a whole new value, but we are mutating the object that the signal returns to us. And again, when we click here on the button, the current object inside the signal will be mutated and the template get notified and re-rendered. Okay, so far so good. Let me show you 2 more API calls on signals. The computed signal. And with the computed signal, we can combine our person signal with the count signal. It maybe doesn't make so much sense to combine these two signals, but just for demo purposes. And here, as already shown, I can maybe combine the age signal and add always the value of the count signal to it. And whenever the person or count value changes, the age count signal will be re-rendered, will be recalculated. And if I bind this to my template, it will be re-rendered. One really, really cool thing about this computed signals is that as long as no of the signals that are computed inside changed, age count, the value, the already calculated value that is inside age count, it will not be recalculated again. It's cached. So it's basically holds its value. And whenever a getter function is called, it will just return the cached value and not recalculates everything again. It's just recalculated when the person or the count value really, really changes. And now we have basically seen the main API of the new Angular signals. And whenever I click anything, our Angular application is already really reactive. And we have a combination of two signals. We have an object. We're mutating just one object. And this is basically everything that we need to know till now about the Signal API. Sometimes you do want to have a side effect, like let's say whenever the count signal changes, I like to send an HTTP server request or something like this. For that, Angular introduced something that's called effect. An effect is a function that is also bound to a value from a signal. So again, whenever this signal changes, the whole effect function will be executed. Let us take a look at this shortly. So whenever the count value now changes, the effect will be triggered and we will log it on the console. Great. One thing that's also important to know is we might set and signal multiple times, let's say 4 times, but only the value inside the box will be changed. And as soon as we call the getter, the current value will be read out of the box. So when the template is rendered and we call the getter of the count signal, we get the value 14 because the value in the box changed so often that it doesn't matter if it was 11, 12, or 13 before, since it is not as an observable which emits the values. It just gets the value as soon as we call the getter function. And this is also one huge advantage that signals now have, because it only just notifies, it is not just the value, but it's also a change notification. Okay, great. We got to know a little bit about the Signals API. So now the final question, will observables disappear? And it always reminds me of a great talk from Alex Rickerbauer, actually. I guess it was on an ng-conf 2 years ago. It was called 10 design mistakes the Angular team made, like an retrospective view of the Angular team decisions. And there he asked the question, we did some statistic and surveys about how is the RxJS amount right now inside Angular? Like, are we using too much RxJS or are we using too less RxJS? On my opinion, I would say too less, but the result were actually 50% and 50%. So he joked back then on stage that, yeah, so it seems like they're using exactly the right amount of observables and RxJS inside Angular. So it definitely differs. And I can completely understand a lot of developers. For them, RxJS is too complex, especially when it comes to operators or combination operators. So they really eager like to see that observables hopefully will finally disappear. The thing is that a lot of Angular modules are still relying on observables. We have the reactive forms module. Maybe we remember there is this value change observable and the status change observable we might be using heavily. The router module, when we want to get some information about the query parameter or the parameter inside an URL, we could get this from the snapshot property as well. But sometimes we need to listen on changes of the URL, so we need to subscribe to this observable. And last but not least, our HTTP client. The HTTP client, whenever we make a GET request or POST request or any kind of request, it will be returning an observable. And for that, the Angular team, which they are always working really hard of being backwards compatible and being really able to use all the APIs together, they created a new package, which is called Angular RxJS Interop. And this I want to show you in the next 5 minutes, how to use it and what you need to take care of by using, well, this package as well. For that, let me jump to another project. It's nothing really fancy. It's basically, I mean, it is fancy. It's the best ever existing book project ever. So here we just fetching a couple of books. Now it's really big. So we're fetching some books. We're having a detailed view. And of course, this is really coming from an HTTP backend. And now I'd like to have this as with signals. I'd like to have not a book observable bound to my template, but a signal. So first of all, let's take a look at this book API service, which actually holds this observable. Let's first take a look at the getAll function. The getAll function calls the HTTP client, and we're getting a book array from a backend on this URL. This is called inside a component with a property, and this is of course bound to a template with the async pipe as we learned it, because it unsubscribes automatically and so on and so forth. But I don't want to have this as an observable bind to the template right now. I want this as a signal. And for that, we have a great function, which is called, well, toSignal. And this toSignal function comes now from this Angular core RxJS interop package. And maybe, as we can imagine already, it will convert an observable to a signal. So let me change a couple of things here, because first we might want to have this observable stored in a field and then giving this here in. We need to add some options over here, since a signal always asks us to have an initial value. So the initial value could be just an empty book array. And then, of course, we also need to change the return type of this function. And now it's done. We converted our observable to a signal. In order to use it, we need to change a few things inside the component, because now we don't have an observable anymore. And we see my WebStorm IDE already infers a signal to it. And then we can just go to our template and remove everything that is related to the async pipe and the signal itself. Really important is that we need to call the getter function over here. And maybe you remember when it came to observables, subscribing twice to this could lead to two HTTP requests. So for that, we're using this as functionality or the share operator. But with signals, we do not need to do something like that at all anymore. And now we already converted our observable-based application to signals. Okay, but sometimes it's a little bit more trickier, right? Sometimes we have our detail component and we have already, like, let's say, a pipeable operator chain. And we would like to maybe convert a signal to an observable that we still could use our observable type over here. In order to showcase this, I will shortly convert this API call also to a signal that we then, of course, again, it's just for demo purposes. It doesn't make sense to convert an observable to a signal and then the signal again to an observable, but just for demo purposes. So let's pretend this function gives us back a signal. One thing that is also really, really important, and I haven't told yet, is that when we're converting a signal, when we're converting an observable to a signal, the signal automatically unsubscribes from this observable. But in order to be able to do so, we need the construction context, like the injector. Because maybe you know that from Angular 16 on, we have also something that is called take until destroyed operator. And this take until destroyed operator automatically destroys an observable as soon as the component gets destroyed. And if we're using this operator outside of a construction context, we need to pass in something that's called a destroy ref, that the operator knows, hey, well, I need a reference when the component actually will be destroyed. And the same kind of mechanism applies to here as well. Like when the signal is possible to automatically unsubscribe from the observable as soon as it gets destroyed, we need to give in an information like, hey, here's a construction context in a form of here's the injector. So please, here you can find the information when the API service actually eventually will be destroyed. And that's why we're passing in here the injector. Okay, so far so good. Now I get an error over here, of course, because I expect this to be an observable, but it is a signal now. And now the same like having a function to observable, to signal, we now, as I already said, having a function now that is called to observable. And here is basically exactly the same. So here we also need to pass in the injector ref because this observable also needs to be automatically unsubscribed when the component gets destroyed. So the second parameter over here will be also the injector. But this just needs to be done if the whole thing is called outside of the construction context. For instance, when we take a look again to our book component, I didn't need something to do something like this. Like when I called the get all function, I also didn't pass in the injector because when I called the book API service and the function that converts the observable to a signal, it was already inside the construction context because as soon as the component will be called by the constructor, this field gets initialized. So we have already all the information and all the context we need to know. And for that, we didn't need it there, but we need it over here in the book detail component, because inside the switch map, the toObservable function doesn't know anything about its destruction context. And for that, we need to pass in the injector over here. And now we saw both ways how we can still use signals together with observables, with the whole package RxJS interrupt, which holds 3 new things: to observable, to signal, and also the take until destroyed operator comes also from this package. I think I'm already running a little bit out of time. I'm sorry. So let's jump back to the slides. Again, as mentioned, to signal and to observable are the new APIs for converting signals back and forth from the whole observables and signals. One heads up, this API, the naming of the API to signal and to observable, could still change. It's not high likely, but it could still change a little bit since everything in Angular 16 is developer preview. But we will get signals really as stable in Angular 17. So to sum it up, signals in Angular 16 are still available as a developer preview, but from the signal API point of view, there will be no really huge changes. The Rx interrupt, like the to signal and to observable function, they could still change a little bit, but yeah, just play around with it. I will really highly suggest to play around with it, since right now they are integrated into the existing change detection model, and signals are behaving like the async pipe when it comes to on-push components. So as soon as we bind a signal to a on-push marked component, it will mark the component for check, that in the next circle we get a change detection, same like an observable with the async pipe. So it's integrated right now in the current change detection model, and hopefully the future of Angular change detection strategy is zoneless. No, I said it. Hopefully it's zoneless. And we also could get maybe component-based change detection strategies. Like in this component, I want to have maybe the whole component always re-rendered with zone.js. And here in this component, I want to just have the value that are actually affected and changed being re-rendered in the template. So signals are a huge, awesome step into this direction. And so since they provide a finite control over change detection, the future is really bright when it comes to change detection in Angular, and for that, performance and more activity. Signals will not replace RxJS. For me, I love RxJS. There could be not enough RxJS on Angular, and I hope that many developers will join this path as well, to maybe having both combined together. As mentioned, the future of the change detection in Angular is zoneless and component-based. I hope I didn't run too much out of time. It was a lot to tell. I hope I was able to give you a small introduction into signals. It was maybe a little bit too fast, but you can find my demo example of the project I showed on my GitHub repo. And of course, I will also share the slides afterwards. And for that, thank you so much, Brooke. And thank you so much, the whole team, for having me here. And of course, I'm up to answering some more questions together with Maria.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. That was fantastic. And don't worry about the time at all. I think we went over a little bit, so you were just right. And it was fantastic bringing in all of that conversation about observables and like everything that you said. So thank you. Great introduction to signals. Great demo. We will take just a couple of Q&A questions. I know a lot of people need to go, but then also I've been loving the discussion over in the chat because we do have a channel on the Angular Discord. And if anybody would like to go and continue learning about signals there, just scroll up in the chat and you'll be able to see that link to our Discord channel. Definitely go hang out there. I think there will be some great conversations there. And then you can always connect with Martina and Maria after as well. These are seriously, and I'm not just saying this because they're just here, but these are two of my absolute favorite women in Angular. They're just dynamic developers. And I have teased Martina about this before and just saying that when I think of someone who is Angular, Martina comes to mind immediately. She is just so passionate about Angular. And if you're not following her, please do already. She's just such a great teacher. So, and Maria as well, both of you. But yeah, let's take a couple of questions and then we'll need to head off after that. But if anybody has any questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A. Let's see what we've got. Okay, so looks like the last one I'm seeing there says, I heard signals should be used on component layers. What fits to that presentation? But I'm a bit confused about the use case for the NGRX signal store then. Why is that needed?
So to be quite frankly, I haven't been so experienced with the ng-conf signal store. So I'm not, maybe you mean the component store of that. So basically, ng-conf is also all things about RxJS. So when you integrating ng-conf inside Angular, you get observables as well. And as far as I remember right now, they also already provided a signal API to converting all observables to signals, and like with ng-conf. When you mean the component store of ng-conf, so basically it's the same. I mean, the component store of ng-conf is nothing less than having behavior subjects in a service. And these behavior subjects could be now replaced the signals, and then you maybe have the difference. It's just a way of how the templates are being notified is different, like what I meant about observables and signals. So maybe you can ping me with an email if I haven't really answered your question, and maybe you meant something entirely different. But yeah, let's just ping me if I didn't answer your question, or if you have a follow-up question.
See, there's one in the chat there. Could you talk a bit about the dependency graph signals creates?
When you, I mean, the signals are coming from the Angular core package, basically. So I'm also not 100% sure what you may mean by the dependency graph over here. I mean, a dependency graph is like, hey, you import something from there, and maybe you create a circle because it imports from there and there and there. So signals are coming directly from the Angular core package. If I'm not mistaken, yes. So yes, they do. I just looked up again. If yeah, they are from the Angular core package, and for that, I mean, like everything is imported. Almost a lot of things are imported from the Angular core package. So I'm not sure if you will get circular dependencies or things like that. So I'm also, again, not 100% sure what you mean with the dependency graph on that, basically. I mean, sorry, I know what a dependency graph is, but it's coming when you have multiple libraries and you need to import things from this library and this and this and this, and then maybe you can create a dependency graph with NX, and then maybe you see, oh, I'm not following DDD or domain-driven design or things like that, for instance. But it feels a little bit different.
Okay. Do you think signals will reduce the learning curve for new developers? Great question.
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, that RxJS is really complicated. I mean, I know I'm already blinded, since for me, I use them as a daily basis, the operators and everything. But when I teach, I'm like Maria, we're actually doing the same kind of workshops, Angular workshops, and we're always talking about RxJS and all. I don't know what about you, Maria, but it's really complicated for some of the persons to understand RxJS and all the operators. And Signals is so intuitive, especially like other frameworks like Svelte, Solid, and React soon as well. You will use them as well in the future. I just really like the new way of activity, basically. And when it comes to Signals, the replacement for behavior subject, I just can answer this really shortly. Yes, they are a replacement for behavior subjects. It's just about what you want to use in the end, basically. If you still want to have the possibility to use the operators to transform all the things in a more declarative way, but with Signals, you have, again, a little bit more of an imperative way of programming, basically. So if you don't want to use any kind of operators on your value and write these kind of transformation of the values inside the update function of a signal, then you should use Signals over behavior subjects.
Maria, I've seen a couple of questions, whether it was during the panel discussion, or I've seen it a little bit here as well, but people are wondering, you know, kind of along with your talk, you were talking about these women who've really made an impact in programming. But a lot of people are wondering, I saw them asking specifically, how do we get on the Angular team? And I'm going to change that just slightly, because I know that you've been recently made a GDE. So I'd love if you could just share, and this will probably be our last thing before we need to head out, but what can you recommend to others for how they can become a GDE or just reach a level, maybe leadership or something, just to go up the career ladder as they'd like with their career?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I think I can tell how it started for me, and actually two relevant persons are in here in this meetup. It's you and Martina. Because for me, it started with just a blog that I decided to write by myself. And that would be actually my answer. I started to write it just because I wanted to write it for myself. I didn't have this goal of becoming a GDE or, I don't know, joining Google or doing whatever. I was more like, I wanted to be useful for the community, and I wanted to write it just for the outer world. I was seeking some thought exchange, and that was the driving force behind it. And then someday you wrote me on Twitter if I wanted to write for ng-conf, and then it all started. And then I joined a program called Women Developer Academy, which supports women and helps them to build up the branding and to find out what I'm standing for, to enhance my speaking capabilities, etc. So, and from there, one thing led to another, but it was always more about people and networking and talking to people and helping people. People that I know or people I don't know, just like community or just some developers out there reading something or listening to my talks. So I'd say you shouldn't focus on the status in the first place. It's more about finding out what your heart beats for. It's as obvious as it sounds, or it's as no-brainy as it sounds. But I think whenever you have the driving force, you have this energy to do more. And once you start to do more, then you start to get noticed, and then you start to produce more, etc. And then those starts to spin up.
Yeah. And I think that goes with both moving up the ladder at your company, at your career, but also like I was asking, like becoming a GDE, but can't agree with you more. I think taking those opportunities and just starting small, be that a blog that you start just for yourself, and then going from there, but finding ways to contribute to the community, I think is huge. Just one great thing, and this will be our shameless plug, but come speak at the meetup. We have opportunities all the time, and especially with these new events, these new hour of empowering events coming up, we're going to have lots of opportunities for people to come give lightning talks. And if that's something that you're wanting to move up and to take a new position at your company, or go enter on that road to becoming a GDE, giving talks is a great way to do that, because you can take the video, the recording of that, and share that with your employer, with the GDE team. Look at how I'm contributing, look at my passion. So start small. That would be my addition to that. And Maria is a great example of that. So thank you so much to both of you, and to our other panelists as well. I know Jessica and Madleina had to leave, but Tracy as well. Thank you to this.labs. They're a sponsor of the Dev Life and the Angular Plus Show podcast, so we appreciate their support. And then once again, we want to thank Oasis Digital so much for the pizza and for the fun and their contribution to this event. We really appreciate their generosity and taking part in this. So thank you so much to them. And we will look forward to seeing everybody next month. Please don't forget about our Spanish event coming up on, I believe it's the 8th, if I'm looking at the calendar right, second Tuesday of the month. And then we'll have the Hour of Empowering the third Tuesday, and our normal English event the fourth Tuesday. That we have Dan Wallin, Joe Skeen, and Tony Alicea, if anybody has taken any of his courses on Pluralsight and Udemy and around, but it should be a knockout event. So we'll hope to see you all then, but thanks for joining everybody, and we'll catch you next time.